Laura and the Gray Mare by Kathleen Duey. Chapter 1. The girl who comes to stand beside me in the early morning brings me handfuls of barley and her soft voice. I am so glad to be away from shouting men and Barb's sense of anger and blood. Lorak, Fallen cried out in the dusk before the sunrise. Laura o Marha. Her voice was loud enough to wake a rock. Of course I did not answer her. I am no fool. And I was on my way to see if the Gray Mare had foaled. So I skittered to the side, silent as the night breeze, and I hid in the black shadows beneath the old oak that stands beside the gates. Fallen is my aunt, now 14 years old and not yet married. She is 5 years older than I am, and she scares me. Her voice is as shrill as iron and stone. Hard put. I can tell you true that I have been afraid of Fallen all my life because she has always been mean to me. She was mean to my brothers too, when they were little. Do I need more reasons to dread her? You may add this to the count, then. Until I was old enough to outwit her, she often stole my supper and lied about it. She still takes more than her share sometimes. At sunset, just as the new day is beginning, Fallen likes to stand out where she can see the distant shine of the sea, her hands on her hips. She picked a fight with the nightfall if she could. She is, after all, my father's little sister. They share the same temper. My mother says father is a calmer man now at 29 than he was at 16 when they were married. He is both loved and feared by all our relatives, all the people in our tooth, and by me. She was entirely healed now. It had taken a long time. The Gray was a beauty, taller and more graceful than any horse I had ever seen. My father had found her grazing free on his last journey, wearing a bridle with a broken throat latch, and dragging one rein, a wound on her foreleg. There was a burn mark on her jaw, a strange design that could not have been an accident. What tooth marked their horses with fire scars? Some battle had freed the Gray from her owner, my father guessed. He had brought her limping home, and I had nursed her every day, bringing lichen and cress to stanch the wound until it healed. That was when my visits to the Gray Mare began. I could not take time from my work, so I slept less, creeping out of the house to go stand beside her in the dark, talking quietly so she would know that she was not alone. It raised her spirits, I could tell. She began eating better and she healed. My father had never thanked me for nursing her back to soundness, but he had been happy to hear she was in full flow. When I realized it, I had been dizzy with joy. Girls are not allowed to have horses, but since I have saved the mare, I had cared for her so well, I hoped my father would consider giving the foal to me. When he came home from whatever battle he was fighting now, I intended to try to talk him into it. Laura! Fallen's shout shattered my thoughts, and I held still as a rabbit beside a wolf path as she passed before me and opened the gates to go into the rath. She called my name three more times inside, then came out again. I could hear the mare shifting uneasily as they stood inside the great circle of the earthen walls. Startled by the intrusion, I recognized the high, gentle neigh of the Gray Mare. If Fallen didn't give up, I would have to go to my day's work without seeing the mare. I let out a long breath as Fallen came back past me and headed for a cottage. I knew why she was angry, and there was nothing I could do about it. I pressed my back against the outer earthen wall and tried to decide what to do. I wanted so much to go see the Gray Mare, but I was afraid Fallen would come back and find me there, inside the rath. The walls of the rath are simply this, monstrous big heaps of earth, shaped like giant rings, and one inside the other, both broken for two carts, with, at one place, to let people pass in and out. That's where the gates are. We keep the mares inside the earthen walls at night. During the day, boys herd them out to graze. They won't let me help. I am not a boy. My father says it is rare for a rath to have two earthen walls. Usually there is only one. He has traveled near to Dublin and back, and has seen only one other like ours. Perhaps the one who built it so long ago had better harvests than others did. Maybe they had the strength to keep digging and dirt piling for years. Inside the huge earthen walls, the ground is open, except for four little round bears that my father says were once houses. Now the stock uses them for shelter in the rain. I shivered and pulled my wooden brat closer around my shoulders and tugged the thick cloth down to cover my arms. The brown wool was softened with wear. We were finally past the last cold days of Gam. I could not wait to see the sun after all the dreary days of people and animals wet and trembling with cold. Fallen did not call my name again for such a long time that I dared hope, even though I know her too well that she might have given up. A moment passed, then two. The silence was lovely, lovely, and the morning sky was passing from deep gray to lighter gray. But I was not fooled. I knew she was trying to trick me into coming out if I was hiding. So I did not. I looked up at the gray sky instead. The day before had been sunny and fine, and I hoped this would be another cloudless day. I had not pondered long on the graying sky before I heard tiptoe foots on the path. Fallen was coming back. I knelt down. They stayed perfectly still. Fallen passed. I could see her easily now in the dawn dusk. She went on around the raft, following the curve of the outer earth wall until she struck off toward the stream. Then she began shouting again. I could hear her all the way down to the cows. Then the direction of her voice changed, and I knew she was heading back again. She probably had gone far enough just to see there was no candles lit in the dairy fire, that I was not starting my day's work early. Bebin, Garak, and I were always up before most of the others because we had to milk. It didn't take that long this time of year. The few cows that had been bred late enough to have winter calves were drying up, giving less and less milk every day, and they were so tame we didn't even have to put spancels on their front legs to hold them still. Work of all kinds is lightened by Bebin and Garak. We are like sisters. We are so close in age. Laura! The shout made me shudder. Fallen was on her way back up the hill. I know exactly why she was so angry with me. It was this simple. She had, after 5 days, decided to comb her knotted hair. Magnus had not meant to ruin Fallen's carved antler coat, but he had. He was my littlest cousin. He was Garrick's youngest brother. Magnus had played with the comb 5 days past without asking, and had dropped it where one of the dogs could snatch it up and run. By that time he had gotten it back, the comb was cracked. Any dog will chew bone, of course. It is their instinct, and they're right. How was the hound to know that this bit of antler had been carefully sawed, and that the row of slender close-set teeth would be so fragile? Unfortunately, this was no ordinary comb. It had belonged to my grandmother, Fallen's and my father's mother. It had been given to Fallen on my grandmother's death when Fallen had been barely old enough to use it without help. I knew she cherished it. I knew she prized that comb more than she cared for whoever had caused the damage. Plain and simple. Magnus knew it. It was I, coming back from evening's milkings, who found Magnus crying behind the awful heap near the green fields. The new-hatched spring flies were buzzing around the rotting manure and the piles of last year's cornstalks. The ruined comb was tight in his little hands. I could not think what else to do, so we washed it carefully and put it back in Fallen's wooden box. I hoped she might think she had cracked it herself without knowing. Small chance, I should have known better. Fallen was always eager to lay blame for any mishap upon someone else, and she had clearly assumed the blame was mine. Ah well, better me than poor little Magnus. She was in fine temper. Little Magnus hardly needed her to drag him about by his ear, thumping his thin back. Not that I would enjoy it, mind you, but I had stood it from her before, many times, and it wasn't so awful as it sounds. I was bigger now, and she couldn't hold on to me very long. Little Magnus walked with a limp. He had wandered into the cattle herd when he could barely toddle, and a cow had stepped on him. The hurt leg had healed crooked, and his gait was changed forever. Even so, he was sunny and worked hard, and he sang like a bird. I liked him very much. Everyone did, except Fallen. Listening to her footsteps come closer, I was hard pressed to think of anyone she did like. I was entirely unable to think of anyone who liked her. Even my father, who was her very own brother, could only stand her for a while before he found some excuse to take his leave. He said Fallen was like their father in that way, easy to anger, always ready for a fight. He had also said it was a shame she wasn't a boy, that she would have taken to sword and bow and battle like birds to the air. One thing was clear, she had never taken to spinning thread or weaving, grinding grain, making bread, or any of that work girls and women had to do, day in and day out. Half the time, she had her sleeves rolled up to bare her forearms, and her lane hitched up like a boy. She liked to work without the long hem shortening her stride. This is shameful, but it's true. I pray every evening to the old ones, the saints, and the fairies, that some man would be stupid enough to marry Fallen and take her away from us one day. I knew one thing standing there in the graying light of dawn. It wouldn't be this day. She was very close again, bellowing my name, following the curve of the raft walls, back around to the gates. I stiffened. It was time to make a decision, or I would be stuck here so long that Bevan and Garrick would come looking for me. Some days I would have just stepped out into the gray morning light and let Fallen find me, just to have it done and over with. This morning, for whatever reason of fate, fortune, and divine guidance, I did not. Instead, when she was still just far enough away not to see me in the shadows of the oak branches, I hitched my lane up around my waist and scrambled up the massive outer earthen walls. A second later I was tumbling down into deep foss that lay between the outer wall and the inner one. I landed on my feet, then pitched sideways, falling hard on my back. I lay there for a long moment, staring up into the sky. This place between the earthen walls dug deep to free enough dirt to build them. This was a fairy place, everyone knew. It was dangerous to trespass where they lived. I got up, my legs a little shaky, then I gathered a handful of the back of my lane, pulled the cloth around my body, trying to see how badly I had dirtied it. It was my newest one, not yet outgrown. It was still loose and came nearly to my ankles, the sleeves still long enough to cover my whole arm to the fingertips. In the dim light I could only feel the damp in the grit. At least I had not torn it. My woolen brat, pulled close around my shoulders for warmth, was only a little muddied. I had landed more where I sit than anywhere else, and my mother was no fool. She had dyed the wool of my brat a light dunny brown to match the brown linen of my lean, and both of them to match the dirt. I pulled my lean straight and shrugged my brat higher around my shoulders, then looked around. It was very odd to stand in this gigantic trough between the two circular walls. We had pounding rains 10 or 12 days before. The water had been running through the foss then, fast enough to hear the trickling as it shifted into the base of the walls and drained away. Lara! Fallen's shout was hoarse with fury. I flinched, even knowing that she could not see me through the high earthen wall, that she would never suspect I would brave fairies to escape her. Everyone knew stories about children disappearing in the foss, borne off by fairy folks, lost forever. The stories might be accurate, but this was the truth. I was by far more frightened of Fallen than of any fairy this morning. Lara, where are you? I began to walk silently, following the inner curve of the raft, moving away from her. I slid my hand along the earthen wall, grass and moth tickling my fingers. The men of the tooth had spent part of the last summer repairing the outside wall, digging out loose places and repacking the soil when the rain had weakened it. For a while the patches had been easy to see. Now, after a season of rain, green had covered them. Green. I realized that I could see colors and knew the sun was close to rising. Fallen would need only to see me at a distance to know I had not answered her call. She would bring her to a frothing rage, I was sure. I could hear her still talking to the empty oak branches. Lara, I know you are up in that tree, she growled. Come you down now. Shivering and scared, I began to run, hoping she would not hear my footfalls, that she would stand talking to the empty branches long enough for me to climb over the earthworks on the opposite side. If I made it all the way around the huge circle, then over the top and on to the woods, I could hide again. Then I would simply wait. Bevan and Garrick would soon come to the dairy. The other women would be about their work within an hour. If I could hide that long, Fallen would be stopped at least for the day.